Everyone, thank you so much for joining us this Friday. My name is Catherine Thomas. I'm the Education Commission Chair. Just for your awareness, any questions can be sent to the Q&A. If you can't hear me right now and you know I'm talking because my voice is moving, please simply go ahead and log back out and log back in. So that we can ensure that you don't miss any of all the information we're planning to share today. This is being recorded, and the slides and the recording will be available to WEDA members for download and for your review for the long future. If you have not taken the poll, please do so. I see about 76% of the people have kind of come in, and the reason that we're doing this specifically is so that the presenters, Thomas and Renee, can understand better of who is showing up and how they can best support you with their presentation. Speaking of Thomas and Renee, Thomas Kalm obtained his master's degree in offshore and dredging engineering from the Delft University of Technology. Thomas did his graduate internship with Great Lakes Dredge and Dock, where he wrote the WEDA award-winning paper, The Influence of Adhesion on Putting Processes in Dredging. After his degree, Thomas worked for Critical Mines in the Netherlands, providing project management experience and efficiency to the international maritime industry. Thomas continued to be involved in and is enthusiastic about the U.S. dredging industry, where he saw a growing need for communicative people who understand the industry and can translate complex problems into workable solutions. In 2021, Thomas founded CoWaves, a business that aims to meet this need by analyzing processes, identifying potential bottlenecks, and offering solutions. Today, he manages the Amsterdam office and team while supporting large client projects in the United States. Thank you so much, Thomas, for joining us. Also joining us today is Renee Northern, and she is the general manager of CoWaves Americas. She joined the CoWaves team in 2021 with a core focus on successfully launching the U.S. office. She is client-focused and goal-driven with a passion for project efficiency. Renee brings many years of management and leader experience. She is a strong personnel manager, an effective coach, and a thoughtful planner, the best kind. She has led teams as large as 200 plus people and developed programs that have helped others realize success. She believes leading with kindness while seeking opportunities through relationship building is important, as do I. Together, they support the entire CoWaves team and work towards the continual improvement of their client projects. Again, thank you so much for everybody who has shown up today. Please do take the poll, and throughout the presentation today, we're going to be running some polls, so just have that available to you. I will now be turning it over to Thomas and Renee. I'm really excited for this presentation, and I look forward to all of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will start sharing the slides. In the presenter mode. Nope, that's the wrong screen, excuse me. There we go. Okay, I think we're all good to go. Welcome everybody. Thank you for the introduction. Renee and myself will skip through some topics today, what we think are useful topics for you as a project manager or a project manager to be. We like to keep it interactive, so if there are any questions, please type them in. We're happy to answer them throughout the presentation. And we have some polls throughout, so we would like to know what your experience is, what your thoughts are on particular topics, and make it as interactive as possible, even if it's through a camera and online. So what we're going to run through today is an introduction of what CoWaves is, the definition of a project. It's a very broad spectrum. Everything could be called a project, but what do we define it as? Part of managing the project, the communication part that Renee will take care of. Then we'll talk about scheduling and critical path. And related to that is conflict management, and then a wrap up and 3 things we hope you remember today. And we're going to talk about hard and soft skills. Those are both required in our perspective of being a successful project manager. We do want to say that we follow different methods that are out there, and we cherry picked a couple where we feel comfortable and what works for us as a company. So these are advices, and please take them to heart with a grain of salt, and make them work for yourself. CoWaves is a company that supports different clients on in the maritime sector. We've done some project management for consulting and scheduling for Conrad. We did some project management on LNG bunkering vessels, for this case in Titan. We work on luxury yachts, making sure that we're within time, scope, budget, and Dame, a famous, also Dutch, in this case, Dutch shipbuilder. So our clientele are always related to something with water. So a definition of what is a project, excuse me, that's very broad. So how we would like to define it is when you set up a project with a project team, it's for a temporary basis. And the temporary basis is making sure that you have a agreed specific outcome. So we would like to have a tangible, defined result before you start on it with a clear goal. Besides the goal, we always strive to have a particular quality standard. What do we agree on within the dredging? There's a particular cut level to reach. With yachts, it's a particular sound level you cannot exceed. This within a reasonable time constraint, within boundaries, with a clear start and a clear ending. And also financially with budget constraints. This is for us how we would define a project. When thinking of a project, there are different ways to approach it. There are different key elements. As the poll indicates, there is improvisation, routine, or a combination. If we have some poll results in, I'm looking forward to that. Nice, yeah. So you guys are absolutely in the right direction. So when you think of a project for an artist or an architect, they also approach it as a project, but that is much more demand oriented. So that's more ad hoc. You'll be more on the improvisational side. You have to be flexible. You want to move around and you have impulses and new ideas that come into mind. So there's a lot of flexibility, and the result is not always, or that's clear, but it's not always very clear how much time and how much resources do you need to get it done. On the other side of the spectrum of a project, you have routine. So that's very clear, concise work. That could be like a car factory. Every station has a very clear task at hand. So you can increase very highly efficient, if you will. Very clear cost, very clear time of step. And what we are trying to do is be somewhere in the middle, and that's what we call project-based work. So we have a clearly defined result. We build a schedule, we build a plan together that may or may not differ over time. What we see in a lot of projects is what you've defined up front or thought of. Well, there are hiccups and bumps throughout the project you have to deal with. So what you would like to do is be highly effective, being able to be nimble enough to change, so have a little improvisation. Don't end up in a complete routine, because you can't always in the project, because there's always some gray area still to define. And so we see that in the spectrum between improvisation and routine. Project-based is in the middle. When working on a project, it's like, what they say sometimes is, how do you eat an elephant? Well, as a one bite every time. So what we want to do in a project is define phasing. So you break up something that's huge into eatable chunks, manageable chunks, and it has to be somewhat logic, can be a timeline, can be a process step. And every phase you want to control, manage and get these means and methods of controlling it into place. As two examples, high level of a project is the top line, planning, preparation, execution, can be a dredge project. And the bottom line, collecting information, analyze and report, can be a consultancy project. Both logical phasing. This phasing you can break into smaller, manageable chunks, dependent on the size and complexity of your project. For us, called logic pieces. So within engineering, for example, you have preliminary design, basic and detailed. All three chunks of work you would like to break down into logic pieces. So this is more or less the part where we say, okay, this is for us a project. And part of the project is managing it. And for us, we would like to know and the experience you have as a project manager. Sometimes you notice that even by what we believe eventually is that project management is absolutely a skill, but being really good at it is by doing it and making mistakes. So project management is based on or the majority of the methods is based on mistakes we made in the past, just to avoid something in the future. So if you would like to become a project manager, it is always nice to work with someone with some experience to share the knowledge on project management. What we are trying to address are some tools that you could use tomorrow to make the first steps to becoming a little bit better project manager or more efficient project manager. And those require particular topics or a breakdown. Go to the next slide. So the majority of us, when we think of project management, we think quality, time, and money. Three very important pillars to keep track of and define up front and eventually close out. What dredging, offshore, shipbuilding, they all have in common is safety has become part of the maritime industry, and also in majority of the companies, a lot of attention go towards safety. So that's also part of the scope of the project manager, and scope contract agreements with your subcontractors, with your co-makers, trying to avoid having gray areas the moment you would like to execute work. Well, so I'm so sorry, this is not in my scope, I've not budgeted for this. You try to avoid something like that. So in our opinion, these 5 topics are topics that the project manager should be aware of and should manage. And part of the managing it is planning, initiating, thinking ahead, being ahead of the curve before you start working on a project or executing it. And what we then could create is a project management plan. And well, that's not for me the most fun thing to do. I'm not a big writer. I like to present and like to talk. I like to have conversations, participate, but eventually to clarify and set a baseline and manage expectations, some things have to end up on paper. And I've seen project management plans that could be 40 to 60, sometimes 100 pages long, depending on the complexity and what your maybe client expects, or your project team or your organization. And I always have a hard time starting. So if I'm over the hill, if I'm over the top, then if I get my engine going, I'm able to produce the paragraphs and the things and think about how we would like to interact with each other, how we're going to build a schedule, how we're going to inform our clients, which frequency our project team meetings are. So I'm interested in how much time you normally spend on starting and sometimes completing your project management plan. The topics we always take into account. It's nice to see that. Okay, so the majority of the group, I would say, takes more than an hour. So I may have something interesting to get you a little bit started in an easier more effective and less time-consuming way. But before we get there, a project plan, what does it contain? It's also referred to being a project charter or a project letter. And we always like to have a business case. So you have a project sponsor in most cases, someone or some company is expecting you to complete the project, and there's a related business case. Why are we doing this? Is it an investment? Will it be profitable? It can also be the case that you will take a loss on the project, but making sure that you have a market penetration somewhere. So the business case is important. Why are we doing this? What do we want to reach? Tangible, clear goals. It can be referred to as key performance index, KPIs, that you want to define. Okay, why are we doing this? And what do we like to achieve? What's the goal and what are the actual results? It's also a communicating tool, getting people on board, communicating and saying, okay, what am I doing and why am I doing this and with whom and when? It is I'm thinking about if it's a larger file, it's sometimes also a little bit harder to update, but on a monthly or quarterly basis, if the project duration, we're talking months and maybe 1 or 2 years or a good extension of time, it's good to go back. What have I written down a couple of months ago? Is that still accurate, or is there something I've maybe overlooked or has changed that I should take action on? So you keep yourself and your team a little bit in check, writing it down throughout and or at the starting point and updating it throughout your project, just to put a mirror in front of yourself and think, okay, am I doing the right things at the right moment? So topics, we want to make sure that you eventually cover these topics, what we think is part of a project execution plan. We put it in the slide just to make sure. And at the top right, SHEQ is safety, health, environment, and quality. Keep this as a note for when you start creating your project execution plan. So what we have developed is a one-pager project plan. It's a letter size printout where where we have made it a letter size is when you take out a pen, you can only write down an X amount of words in, for example, the project description box. This is avoiding to become too lengthy and still be kind of getting you started. To give you a brief overview or a good global overview, being very brief and concise towards your stakeholders, your project team members, your project sponsor. And we will do a small exercise together. It takes me roughly 20 to 30 minutes with a project team together. Can be a 1, 2, 3, or a 5 or maybe 25 people group project team to fill out this, the bare essence of your project. So I wanted to run through you with a small exercise, and I've taken the research I did as a project example. So the project example is the cutting clay research I did a couple of years ago. And yeah, one of the questions is, yeah, it can take longer digging up stiffer clays when dredging. Why is this? So who got involved? The Technical University of Delft, Great Lakes, and Texas A&M. And the focus is on the stiffer region of clay cutting and the cutting process as a whole. Well, in the past couple of days, Renee and I worked on the slides, and I filled out this in such a way. And I wanted to run through you to it just to give you a brief summary of what did it take me to produce, to communicate to you guys. So at the top left, write down the project name. At the top right, in this case, Great Lakes Dredge and Dock was the sponsor and gave me the ability to travel to the US. And then eventually, okay, what was the purpose? What's the project description, the context and the background? Well, it was the research to be executed on the clay cutting process for stiffer clays to determine where the strength of the soil comes from. Well, the project goal in this case is my client's project goal. And if you have the numbers, the financial impact or improvement inside of the stiffer clay cutting process to increase production. And if you could increase production, you reduce lead time. Well, if you reduce lead time, you could make some more money. So defining then the scope, it's what I said, really high level. I wrote down a desk study. I want a model verification. I want some empirical values to check for different clay types, and I'll write a report. So that's the scope of work. And the scope of work, what's the tangible outcome eventually? That's your project result. So my deliverable was a report containing particular topics. Well, just writing this down will give you already your audience a sense of, okay, that's the heading. This is the result I will receive from him or her over a set amount of time. So who do I involve? Well, GLDD, the University Delft, and Texas A&M. And then what are the main activities? Started in May 2014. I had 12 months time, so I knew by October I needed to have the test set up and all the desk studies done and the test setup built so I could have enough data points and measurements to verify the model and maybe even make some predictions on what the impact of stiffer clays does with the cutting process. And so my completion date was set for May 2015. Part of the team at that time was myself, Sape Minima, and Robert Ramsdell. And the risks, I wrote down the top 2, can be top 3 if you use with your pen. And eventually I want this plan as an example project, this plan being approved by Sape and by Robert so that they are aware of what I'm going to do, what my timeline is, what my goals are. Don't wait too long with this. Even if you think I'm not 100% sure, if you start initiating something like this towards your team or your upper management, you at least have a conversation. You manage also expectations in this way, but also gives you good guidance of, well, these are pitfalls. Think of this while talking about risks. Maybe they initiate or indicate some more risks. You can easily add to your project plan. Well, this is a good starting point. What we've added are some additional questions on the topics that can help you trigger thinking about, okay, which topics, we list the topics we think you should write about, but these questions I ask myself sometimes when I'm stuck. Okay, what do I need to do? How do I want to control and measure progress? Do I want to do that weekly, bi-weekly? Do I want to send out a spreadsheet to my co-makers? Do I want them to email me a picture or an S-curve? Or think about the practicality of which frequency, in which method. Do they need to hand it in hard copy? How do I deal with changes? If there's a scope deviation, what does the contract say? What am I allowed to initiate? Which format or form do they need to hand it in to me? Or how do I report or hand it in towards my clients? Some questions to trigger you when it comes to writing a plan and getting you started. That's the part about project management plan and project management, more or less as a starting point. Would like to hand it over to Renee.
Thanks, Thomas. That's great. Over the next few slides, we're going to talk about the steps that I take and that I recommend taking in order to build a communication plan. We would call this, I guess, a soft skill, but I think sometimes it can be difficult to know how to begin or how to communicate effectively. And so I just want to take a couple of minutes and walk through the steps to build a great communication plan. The first question here is, how many stakeholders do you think your current project or your previous projects usually have? Thomas, you're in charge of the.
Yeah, I got it.
All right, so first we're going to kind of take note of our stakeholders. And a stakeholder is either influenced or can influence a part or all of your project. A stakeholder can be an individual or a group. They can be internal or external. A stakeholder really is somebody who is either interested in or impacted by your project. So interest and influence. Oh, sorry, it just came up. 5 to 10 stakeholders. I think it's pretty dependent on the size of your project, but sure, there can be just a handful of them, and maybe they're all internal. But if you have a larger project, then your stakeholder list grows, and it can grow almost exponentially to infinity. So we do want to set some boundaries on who is a stakeholder, but I think probably somewhere in the 5 to 20 is the most manageable range of stakeholders on a large project. So there are some stakeholders who have an interest, these stakeholders are people who are interested in the outcome of your project, and then there are people who are influenced by either the outcome of your project or the pieces along the way. Thomas? Once we have a list of our stakeholders, we're going to put them in a map and understand how high is their interest and how high is their influence. And a tool that is used across the industry and many other industries is the stakeholder management map. So we can understand which stakeholders we need to communicate with more frequently versus which stakeholders we just need to take note of to understand how we influence them toward the conclusion of our project. Once we've got them mapped, we'll put them in a list and understand what the objectives are and which actions we need to take, and then how to communicate with them. Keep going. Yeah, so we'll just do an exercise together and fill that out. And I think using Thomas's project as an example, we made a list of the stakeholders that were relevant to his project at the time, and how they would be influenced or how they might influence the project either positively or negatively. I think understanding if it's a negative or positive influence is important, so that we can understand how to communicate with them and also how to manage that relationship. Then, oh, sorry, there's a couple of extra slides here. So we took that list and then we mapped them out by interest level and impact level. And it seems that there were a few stakeholders who are high interest but low influence, and others that were high interest and high influence. And I think knowing who your high interest, high influence stakeholders are maybe some of your most important understandings, because these become your key stakeholders. What I don't want anyone to forget is that many of your key stakeholders are in the office with you. They're part of your project team, and knowing how they're impacted by this project or how they can impact the project is really critical to the success of that project. So as you're taking stock of your stakeholders and making this list and putting them in this map, be sure to look around your office. Who across departmentally are the people that are on your team, and what kind of impact do they have on the success and the outcome of your project? From here, we're going to talk about communication management. So why do we talk about effective communication? Because it bridges the gap between these diverse stakeholders who have different cultural backgrounds, who have different levels of expertise, they have different perspectives, they have different interests. So it's important that we plan how we're going to communicate with them so that we can communicate to them effectively. And effective communication means that the communication that we presented was received in a way that it can be understood. I'm going to use a small example and talk about my children's handwriting. There's been plenty of times when someone's written me a letter or a note or an assignment for school that was completely illegible. And that piece of paper that they wrote on was a form of communication. But because it was illegible, it was no longer an effective form of communication. So making sure that our communication is not just legible, but can be received and understood is what makes it effective. Steps to a communication plan is just like any other sort of management plan that we talk about. We plan first, we manage, and then we control. So you're going to plan the steps, build out who you're going to talk to and how you're going to talk to them. It's the who, what, and how of communication. Who are they? What do we say? And how do they want to be communicated with? Once we've created that plan, we're going to manage that plan by making sure it's distributed correctly, storing it in a place that can be retrieved easily, and making sure that the information that's being given can be understood. Then, of course, we want to control that process by looking back at the plan occasionally to make sure that it's still relevant to the project. Once you have your list of stakeholders and you understand what their level of involvement or interest is into the project, I like to use this matrix here to really understand who is responsible, who is accountable, who will be consulted, who is to be informed, and who will be your support. The x-axis is your key stakeholders, and the y-axis are the tasks. And this can be a massive document or it can be a small document. I think I would take the KPIs and your key stakeholders, or you can build one separately that is just for your internal team if you struggle with internal communication. But this just helps you to understand who these people are and how or what kind of information we're going to get from them, what kind of information we're going to give to them, and how to communicate with them. We're going to build one together from Thomas's project. So looking at desk research or literature research, we know that the project manager is responsible, but then we have a mentor and a couple of professors that are either accountable or support. And then we have a production team that can be consulted. And I'm going to skip down a few and look at lab space reservation. This isn't the project manager's responsibility, but it is something that project manager is accountable for. It's good to note who is responsible if it isn't the project manager, because sometimes as a project manager, you have to delegate, but also if you don't have the proper authority, you've got to get support from someone else that is responsible. So knowing who these people are and how they fit into the success of your project just makes you a more effective project manager. Once we have all that information, you have your stakeholders, you have your RASI matrix, you understand who needs to be communicated with, you can build out a communication plan. And this can either be on a piece of paper that you just jotted down because you don't have a very long list, or it can be something in some software that you've built out that you're going to share digitally. You can go ahead, Thomas. And here it is. So what is the name of the project? Who's the manager responsible? Who is sponsoring the project? And the date of the kickoff. And then there are lots of iterations of this, but I think one of the things that, or some of the topics we hope that you add to your communication plan are, what are the deliverable information? Who is the recipient or the multiple recipients? How do they prefer to be communicated with, or how do we need to get the information to these people? How frequently should we communicate with them, and who is responsible for the communication? Additionally to this, you could have a list that also houses people's email address, telephone number, and any other relevant information for getting them the information that they need. After all of that is compiled, everything needs to go to everyone on the team that is responsible for some component of the project. When you give a communications plan to the entire team, you're also giving agency to the entire team. This reduces the need for people to act as mediator, or for people to sort of play telephone or middleman between two departments. So each person can contact an additional support or responsible party to get or give the information they need directly. That just makes the communication process a little more smooth and reduces some of the stress on the project manager, who feels like they kind of need to manage all of the tiny pieces in the life cycle of a project.
Thanks, Renee. Catherine, I just wanted to check with you. Because my screen, I'm sharing the presentation, I can't see any questions. So I'll keep going, and then maybe we save them for the end. Is that okay?
That's fine. We have no questions thus far.
Okay, good. Okay, thanks, Renee. There's an aspect also to the project is planning, time. I was wondering, do we do that on paper? Does that suffice? Microsoft Excel, I think very popular to use. And there are also two software, fairly commonly used, Microsoft Projects, Oracle, and maybe there's another software package out there that you prefer to use. For us, we focus on scheduling is for us. Planning contains activities and dependencies or relationships. We'll discuss them, go briefly through them. We'll give somewhat of a definition of planning levels. There can be sometimes a lot of definitions when it comes to what is it, the level 1 or is it level 3? We've given a range of something that we think is reasonable and we see more often. And you have two software packages we use off the shelf. It's Microsoft Project and Oracle Primavera. I would describe Microsoft Project as an Excel, sometimes on steroids. It has some functionalities, it has some Power BI functionalities on pie charts and S-curves, and fairly nice built in. And Oracle Primavera is more of a database. And definitely with larger projects, you want to have a little steadiness, sturdiness when it comes to, it takes a little bit more time to set up a schedule in P6 than Microsoft Project, but definitely when it's larger and complexer, our preference goes to Oracle Primavera. As I saw in the poll, I think the majority does it, I believe, in Excel and Microsoft Project. So just to clearly define activities and relationships, you have a predecessor and successor in every relationship. And then we have a finish to start. It's very commonly used. Start relationship. That means that an activity starts simultaneously with another activity, a finish-finish relationship, and a start-to-finish relationship. I would recommend using the first two. And why? If you start building a larger schedule, let's say 200 plus activities, if there's a critical path you want to find, or there's an issue or scheduling doesn't fully work, if you've consistently used these two type of relationships, it's easier to analyze your own schedule again to see where you may or may not have made a mistake. If you start using these relationships throughout the entire schedule, it can be a little bit cloudy if you want to make a good analysis on where you stand for your project if you see that things don't add up. Start to finish relationship is commonly used when you start at the end of the project and start scheduling backwards. That's a nice way to use the relationships to see what you need to do today to make sure you're there on time tomorrow or next year. The only hiccup here is eventually that you need to change all your relationships after you've built the schedule from the end of the project to forward, is change them all to start to finish so that the software can make the calculations. In a project, we defined 5 activities, activities A, B, C, D, and E. They all have a finish to start relationship. And today we'll make some recommendations if you want to utilize, in this case, planning software. You have to ensure, as you can see on activity A and B, it doesn't have a predecessor, and D and E don't have a successor. We refer to them as being open ends, and that's something we would try to avoid. We always like to have a closed network. In this case, because it's the start and the finish of the project, we add project milestones, the start project milestone and the finish milestone. This gives you the ability to do calculations if you are scheduling in a software scheduling. If not, you'll end up with some errors. The software won't properly work. While referring to schedules, we talk about different levels. We've given a little bit, somewhat of an indication to give you some guidance on what we think are different levels. Sometimes it's also contractually defined as what is a level 3 and what is a level 4. If you've not defined that, then this may give you a little bit of a direction. So level 1 is really a high level project portfolio level of scheduling. It varies from 10 to 15 activities when you talk about a project. Level 2 depends obviously on the amount of work, the complexity. The schedule can vary between 50 and 3,000 activities. And for us, what you should schedule in a software package is no lower than level 3. And those are activities in a project phase that can vary between 200 to 12,000. And when we talk about level 4, level 5, those are jobs within activities. And we would recommend using an Excel or an ERP software that really defines steps to complete an activity. A very essential part of building a schedule is defining a critical path. And before I spoil the definition of a critical path, we were really wondering, what is a critical path? What does it do? So the multiple choice contains different options. You can check the boxes, the ones that you think are correct. And let me give it a sec. Yeah. So
Thanks, guys. We only have about 20% people participating, so please just check the poll real quick so we can get better results. Thank you.
thanks, Catherine. I will continue. So the critical path is the essence of a critical path is it determines your project delivery date. So any delay occurred on the critical path will be a delay, theoretically, a delay on your project. So if you 1 day late with an activity on the critical path, it will be, your project will be 1 day later. So it's a chain of activities that are linked. As I mentioned before, the essence means that you have to have a closed network. When talking about float, if you want to check how much freedom you have on activities not on the critical path, you can refer to total float. And the critical path, defining the critical path is the total float value is 0 or less. So it could also be minus 18, implying that you're 18 days behind the fixed end date of your project. There could be multiple critical paths in your project. If you solve one, a new critical path could occur. While building the schedule and adding resources, you have the ability to do additional analysis. Do I have sufficient resources? So both in the software packages, if you start adding budget to your activity, and in this case, the black line shows you there's a limit of 400 hours a week of resources available, and the histogram is all the activities you've scheduled within that period. Well, the red part is saying, well, there's an over allocation of that particular resource or resources as a whole. This will imply that this has a large likelihood that a delay on your schedule may occur if you not increase your resource capacity or reschedule activities to bring the red down below the black line. The other effect you could then quickly see is the bulldozer effect. That's implying that activities that are not progressed or have little progress start being pushed by the project and by the project data date further and further, accumulating a lot of hours in the week of, in this case, week 11. So just going back to understand total float and free float, and what's the definition in between. This will help you have a good conversation with your scheduler, or if you build your own schedule, or with your planner to understand where you are in the point of time. So in this case, A, C, and E are activities on the critical path, and free float is the movement of the activity. It has the freedom of movement between its successor and its predecessor. So activity B has the free float indicated on the red arrow on the left, and D, the free float on the right. Adding the free float together is giving you the total float. So the free float is between two activities, and adding all the free floats together of the linked chain will give you the total float. To give you some guidelines and some help to check on the status of your planning, we've populated 8 questions. So we start off with question 1, is all the work scheduled in the project planning? That doesn't mean, is it defined at the granular detail level that we feel comfortable managing it? Or do you at least have sufficient activities in there to cover the scope of work? If the answer is yes, continue to number 2. These questions, we would recommend to use to ask yourself or potentially your scheduler or planner on your project, just to see what the status of your project is. If all 8 questions are yes, the quality of your schedule and the usability is all on green light. I'm going to hand it over back to you, Renee.
Thanks. Speaking of risk, I think we're all adept at calculating project risk, but one of the risks I think we tend to forget about is the risk of losing or the breakdown in communication departmentally. So how do we close the distance between expectation and reality? First, we need to decide where that risk lies. This is a small breakdown of a project by phase, and these are the key stakeholders by phase. And you can see that during the life cycle of a project, those key stakeholders change. And they can either be external or internal, but each one of these people or departments of people have some expectation of the project. And if they're not kept up to date with the reality of the project, then there is a risk in breakdown of communication. And when you have a breakdown in communication, particularly internally, cross-departmentally, there's a breakdown in productivity. So in order to maintain productivity, maintain morale, and to keep everybody producing at their optimum, we need to make sure that we close that gap between expectation and reality, especially internally among your teams. So conflict is defined as the distance between expectation and reality. And I think when you understand that that's really what conflict is, it helps you better mitigate the types of conflicts in terms of communication. So the first thing we need to do is track project progress. So we've done all this work to plan, and Thomas talked a lot about tracking the progress on the project and what is the critical path, and how do we understand where our project is, or what the status is of the project during its life cycle. We have to track that, and we track it for timeliness, for costs, and for resources. This tells us the tasks on the critical path that we know we can manipulate in order to change the delivery date of the project. And it also gives us insight to the total project status so that we know if we're on budget and on time. Once we've tracked that progress, we want to populate a report. And so what I have here for you today is just a one-page project summary report. There are hundreds and hundreds of these out there, so you don't have to use this one. This is just an example. But it does very quickly and concisely give an overview of the total project from a high level. And my recommendation is that you fill one of these out at a regular stage in time through the life cycle of your project. And then once you have that project status report, you want to make sure that you're delivering that to your key stakeholders. Back in that previous slide where we kind of identified who are the key stakeholders across the phases and where is that potential breakdown in communication, those people need to know what the status is of the project, especially internally. And I'm thinking about the people you don't think to normally report to, like your schedulers and your planners. These people need to understand what's the total status of the project, or maybe this is your admin or your people that are responsible for data. These people are still stakeholders in your project, and they like to know what is the project status. So we create a plan, we identify roles and responsibilities, we identify the stakeholders, create a communication plan, monitor that progress, and then report it to the people who can potentially influence your project.
Thank you, Renee. To wrap it up today, we hope we can give you 3 things. 1, plan. Make a communication plan with the one-pager. 2, communicate. Make a stakeholder mapping and define your communication actions, how you want to inform them and in which way and which frequency, and monitor. Can you make sure that you do the planning check with the 8 questions? Thank you very much for listening to our story. We enjoyed preparing this and hope to see you all in Las Vegas.
Thank you very much, Thomas and Renee. I learned a lot. I really personally like the explanation of the conflict risk management. So I'm really excited to talk to my own team personally about that. Again, if you can hear my voice, please take the poll for us to ensure we can give the information back to Thomas and Renee so they can better serve our membership. If you have any questions, we have about 4 minutes left, so please do direct those to the Q&A. And it looks like we have about 60% of the people participating. A lot of people coming in right now. So final announcements, we do have a webinar scheduled for May. It will be about beneficial use, and it's going to be presented by an individual who's actually writing the book on beneficial use. So very exciting. Stand by for that detail. We have the conference going on in Las Vegas, which is occurring in July. If you have not registered, please go ahead and do so. And based on the entry poll, it looks about like half of us who are here right now are members. So if you were hoping to renew your membership, or maybe you didn't know, please do reach out to Tom at info@westerndredging.org. I'm gonna post the poll now. And so you can see that, yay, a lot of topics were liked by the audience. So again, thank you so much to CoWaves and also to Thomas and Renee. Thank you to everybody who spent some of their time on Friday. Wishing everybody a great, happy, and healthy weekend. Tom Capolino, did you have anything you wanted to share?
No, I just want to say thanks to Thomas and Renee and yourself for putting this together. Awesome. And thanks for gathering all those stats. It's very good.
I'm really excited. Yeah, it's a whole new world. So have a great day and stand by for that PDH credit. And with that, logging off, and I'll see you all next month. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.